queen, being a Canadian. If humans have problems with the climate, we take it to Professor Guy McPherson. So Guy, you are here. Welcome. Great to see you, Guy. I know a lot of people are here to see you and others are going to be watching streaming live. And we just wrapped up the first hour with Jorge from Mexico City leading. Thank you, Jorge. And I know Jorge and Nolan and Evan, we're all excited for all the good stuff we have to discuss today. And this is the beginning of the next 2-hour segment in which Professor Guy McPherson and Dr. Tao of Harvard and I will be leading a conversation to which everyone is invited to participate. Guy, good morning. Great to see you. I know everyone's happy to see you and hear from you. And you're on mute. You're muted, Guy. We went with the feature of automatic muting when people join because we have so many people joining for the first time. And welcome to everyone. I see some new faces. Welcome, everyone. Go ahead, Guy. Great to see you.
I figured it out. Thank you. I also discovered the chat box, so that's why I'm not responding on air, because people are sending me questions over there.
Right.
Don't look. It'll just distract you.
Totally. All right. And anyway, while we're waiting for Tao, Guy, if you want to give us some opening words, or I can, or let's just make it a conversation and welcome everyone to the conversation.
My opening words are, my Valentine brought me a box of chocolates this morning, so if I seem like my mouth is full most of the time during this conversation, it's because it is.
Very good. Awesome. And happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Yeah, let's celebrate somebody who got his head cut off.
Oh, was that the origin of Valentine's Day?
Yeah. He got his head lopped off. I don't remember why. He was probably rebelling against the queen or some such silliness.
All right. Well, let that be a lesson to us all. All righty. Well, we're waiting.
Well, wrote a letter to the queen.
All right. Well, while we're waiting for Dr. Tao to join us, why don't we kick off the conversation about solar radiation management as a possible solution. I noticed in the chats there was some talk about cleaning the oceans, regenerating the oceans, etc. A guy had written that the oceans are far too acidified at this point to save. And one thing I'd like to throw out there is just as a possible context for both cooling the planet, deacidifying the ocean, regenerating ecosystems, both land and marine, is the following idea, okay? So some years ago, it looked like the problem of planetary overheating was just unstoppable, a runaway train. No way we could possibly cool the planet and to save life on Earth in time. And then some innovative ideas started bubbling up, notably from Tao at Harvard with the concept of floating mirrors. ice911.org also has some innovative solutions for preserving ice. So imagine that with collective intelligence, we're able to not only invent these solutions, but orchestrate their planetary scale implementation, so that in the case of solar radiation management, we're actually able to cool the planet in time. And then imagine that based on that, imagine we succeed at that. and that based on that success, humanity as a species develops a new level of self-confidence that what we can achieve if we apply our collective intelligence to it. And then imagine many more people joining collective intelligence, knowing hey, wow, we cooled the planet with collective intelligence. What else can we do? I mean, we may think of collectively co-create ways to even deal with such wicked problems as ocean acidification in ways that we can't even dream of today. So my perspective is, let's give it everything we've got, and everything we've got it includes collective intelligence, which we're just pioneering right now with this collective intelligence block party. So anyway, those are some initial thoughts of mine. Love to hear people's thoughts, perhaps starting with you, Guy, who've been thinking about this for quite some time.
Well, you know, I'm the bummer in the room, so I'm not sure I'm a good person to talk, especially at the beginning. I might chase people away. You know, the McPherson paradox, named by my friend and supporter Bill Eddy, is that civilization is a heat engine, and slowing, much less stopping civilization, makes the situation worse. Something I didn't understand until the last 5 years or so. And that said, I am a huge fan of remaining alive and maintaining habitat for humans and other organisms here on Earth, our only home. And so that's why I'm engaged in this exercise and look forward to learning from many people about what we might be able to do to improve the situation. Currently, at the highest global average temperature experienced by Homo sapiens in our history, and I pointed out several ways that we can additionally warm the planet, thereby rapidly losing habitat for our species, and many others. We're also in the midst of a mass extinction event, and extinction events have been responsible in the past, mass extinction events that have been responsible for causing the extinction of at least 50% of the species on Earth. And we're driving this one 10 times faster than the so-called Great Dying, which is the worst of the 6 previous mass extinction events. So, all that said, if it seems like I'm pessimistic, it's because I am. And I'm also open to new ideas. So that's why I spend my time doing things like this with a box of chocolates at hand.
All right. Well, 3 cheers for chocolate. And speaking of new ideas, we have with us the father of a brilliant idea, who is responsible for all of us being together here today for this 2-hour segment. Welcome, Dr. Ye Tao of Harvard University at the Roland Institute at Harvard. And I know you're just getting connected. By the way, welcome everyone. We got new folks jumping in. By default, your microphone is muted when you first enter the Zoom video conference. So when you want to talk, please unmute your microphone. And Yay, assuming you can hear us okay, and you can unmute your microphone. Should be just a little, there you go. Okay. Yes, Yay, welcome. All right. So we've just been talking about the McPherson paradox, and I assume everyone here is well versed in the dozens of self-reinforcing feedback loops driving planetary overheating. So when a number of us step back to look at the big picture and ask the question, how might we actually cool our planet in the face of all the heat that's being trapped by the greenhouse gases? From a physics standpoint, reflecting the main heat source back into space, reflecting a portion of sunlight back into space, as we can do with mirrors, makes a lot of sense. And Dr. Ye Tao has his PhD in physics, if I remember correctly. And Ye, we'd love to hear from you about the concept that you invented of mirror reflection, and feel free to screen share if you'd like. And of course, this is an open conversation. So welcome everyone to the conversation. Ye, please take it away.
Hey, thanks for the introduction. So actually, I think we're not too many, right? So can we just quickly go around and introduce everybody that's in the conversation? Like, take a couple of minutes. So I'm Ye. I'm at the Roland Institute at Harvard. And it's a lovely Friday, and looking forward to speaking with everybody here. So Jorg?
Oh, Jorge. That's Jorge in Mexico City.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, we can delay that later. It's probably good to get started as quickly as possible. All right, so let me just try to pull up the presentation. So I've been, digging at different issues recently, especially looking at ways to tackle with a potentially eventual problem with methane. So I haven't really looked at the previous material that I worked on. So I just threw some slides together this morning, and hopefully it still makes sense. So let's see. So share slide, share this one. All right, can people see this?
Yes, Ye, we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right, so today I think we have about 2 hours to discuss a concept based on some of the most abundant materials we have on Earth to tackle a planetary crisis. I would argue an engineering problem, but let's see. So a few words about where I work, where I come from. So just a small correction to Jamin's introduction. My PhD was in physical chemistry. And but during my academic career, I was trained in several fields of science. I started in high school, becoming very interested in chemistry because I had very good teachers in high school. And during undergrad, my major was officially biochemistry, but I was also very interested in the physical sciences. So I took classes in the physics department. There are quantum mechanics classes and statistical mechanics. So I had a rather broad training when I was in my early formative years. And during undergrad and grad school, my experimental training were in basically try to discover the mechanism of how things worked in different fields, from say how individual molecules or a group of several molecules interacted with each other, to how a complex system of instruments can be put together to provide new functionality, etc. Now I'm at the Roland Institute, which you see on the right side of the slide. It was constructed in the early 80s by a gentleman named, we call him Dr. Land, Edwin H. Land. He's the guy who invented Polaroid camera. And he, like many other successful Harvard dropouts, didn't finish college, and then went on to become a very successful entrepreneur and scientist. So he constructed the Roland Institute after or around the time of his retirement, and devoting the Institute to discover science and engineering in a manner that's not hampered by the regular funding mechanism of the country. And right now, I think we're one of the very few places where people can really investigate science and do whatever they wanted, without having to respond to quarterly reports or the demands of a funding agency. So I was hired by the Roland Institute to build a MRI machine that can eventually give atomic resolution in 3 dimensions. But thanks to the work by others, notably Professor McPherson, I became aware of the urgency of the climate crisis, and I felt it was my duty as a scientist to contribute what I can to this problem. And the Roland Institute and the foresight of Edwin H. Land really gave me this opportunity and the space to work on something that I wasn't really hired to do in the beginning. So that's a pretty not so brief introduction, but anyways, at the Institute we have—
That's beautiful, beautiful introduction. Thank you.
We have about like 10 research groups, very small, like 3 or 4 people. So right now we have 8 people in my position. We are like PIs of different labs, and we work on across many fields of science. Some people focus on making advanced cameras that can track swimming fish and record neuron firing events that in their brain. Other people build new types of instruments to study the mechanism of catalysis. For example, in CO2 reduction reactions, that's receiving a lot of attention recently. And people like me, so my specialty is to design and build nanoscale sensors and complex instrumentation for measure weak forces and magnetism. So when I first became interested in climate science, I just did a Google search like everybody else, like climate change. And if you look at the first like 20, 30 graphs that pop out, you will quickly notice that aside from the noise that's in the graph, there's one common trait for all the graphs that Google will suggest to you. And if you look at the x-axis, you notice that all of the graphs have time as their x-axis. And time is a very human construct. It's our way of perceiving nature. I think animals or plants, they are more content just feeling their immediate environments. Many don't have that long of a memory, except for some of the more advanced mammals. But for the most part, I think the fact that we are fixated on this time axis points to our very anthropocentric view of the problem. And it also suggests perhaps the mainstream is not considering the problem from a more holistic, global, and ecological perspective, as Professor McPherson has been teaching us. So I think, so that's one problem, where we have been fixated on basically what's going to happen to ourselves in the future. And in doing so, we miss many opportunities to solve the problem. And I think many of us here would agree that one major threat and one very deadly threat is food security in the coming years. And there's numerous publications coming out, especially in the past years, that in support and that's consistent with this, I would say, intuitive conclusion that many of us can basically agree on. And that's in to, let's say, what happens in the media. So sorry, what I'm saying right now is not exactly corresponding to what's pictured there. So I'm trying to picture that climate change is very complex phenomenon affecting many variables in the Earth climate system. It can change, say, the salinity of seawater, nutrient quality of different land or sea-based producers, animals, plants, and also the variance of different variables, like how crazy the weather changes and how crazy the pH in ocean fluctuates. there's, hundreds, thousands of potential physical variables one can measure, and one would eventually see that it's departure from what natural variation would be possible to induce. But we have been fixated on basically just one variable, CO2 emissions, and all political action or efforts has been or action has been fixated on trying to reduce emissions, and that's like reducing a huge dimensional space into a single axis. We confine ourselves to this one single axis of CO2 emissions or reductions. We are trapping ourselves into a tug of war that we've been losing for decades, and it's likely that we'll continue to lose in the coming decades, and that will be that. So it's probably time to liberate our thinking away from this one-dimensional axis and explore the whole, the other dimensions that we can access in order to solve this problem. So there's quite a few confusions that exist in the public that's hampering a concerted global action, and concerted action at global scale is what's needed to solve this planetary crisis. So we already discussed that first major confusion is to lump CO2 concentration and temperature as one and the same thing. Another confusion is that many people falsely believe that if we went to 100% renewables, we would solve the problem. And that's simply not true either. And more specific to the scientific community, especially like many of my colleagues, even at Institute, their careers are built on, I would say, selling the idea that making better materials and fancier catalysts would be the solution to solve our energy and environmental problems. But it's also, I think, a limited view based on insufficient review of the whole Earth system. So that's a confusion within selected scientific circles. And for the public, the activists, the environmentalists, like there are many groups that's doing good work, but one problematic belief that many hold is that natural solutions like planting trees or biofuels would save us, and that's actually one of the worst and problems and the difficult opinions that we need to hopefully educate and reverse in the limited time that we have. So we're fighting a big fight. It's a planetary fight, it's big. But instead of thinking complicated, we have to make our task easy and manageable by looking at what's abundant. So instead of looking at advanced catalysts or machines that only a couple of people in the world have access to or know how to build, let's look at things that everybody on Earth have access to, including air, water, sand, rocks, and seawater, for example. So let's see whether we can solve this thing using some of the most omnipresent matter we have. It turns out, actually, I think hopefully you would agree by the end of the presentation that there's a substantial scope in trying to leverage these abundant materials to a solution. So it's getting a little chilly here. I'll just put on the coat. Just a sec, 1 second.
Very good, yay.
It's a good thing that it's still a little bit cold. Like most of this this winter in Boston has been like summer or spring.
Wow, wow.
I think it went over 70 Fahrenheit for a few days earlier, a few weeks ago. So, anyways, so let's see, visualize the problem at a scale that's more relevant to each individual person. Each person living in the US, on average, we emit 1 ton of CO2 every 3 weeks. At standard pressure and temperature, that's the volume of 1 ton of CO2, which is gigantic. Imagine that's the trash that you have to dispose of every 3 weeks. So it's a big problem. But using cheap resources, it's actually possible to neutralize the heating effect of this amount of CO2 at a cost that's on the order of and potentially much less than $10. So before we go into details, I will just quickly point out 3 facts for people at different region of the political or belief spectrum. So for people who have doubts about climate change, I like to settle once and for all that climate change is certainly happening, and it's based on best data we have, anthropogenic. And also, it's mostly work by many other scientists, and also brought to public attention by Professor McPherson, that we cannot simply let go of the fossil fuel industry immediately right now for multiple reasons, or to keep the Earth somewhat cool, and also to have the infrastructure and energy to implement the solutions that we will have to implement in the next decade. Of course, I mentioned already that renewable energies alone are not going to be sufficient. So instead of lumping temperature and CO2 together, let's look at how these variables varied in the history of Earth, in the recent history of the Earth. So data that I use to plot these graphs are taken from these publications. So they're mostly accessible, so people can go check and convince themselves if they are so interested. And I'm right now just plotting a few selected data points to illustrate the range of times that we have high quality data of both atmospheric CO2 concentration and the average surface temperature. So right now we have data for the past roughly 1 million years at high temporal resolution. And these are just a few data points to give a sense of data availability. And the oldest data point at roughly 800,000 years ago was at a time when different branches of the human family separated from each other, and we are, in the same family as Beethoven, there on the right. About 100,000 years ago was when everybody on Earth was in the same family. That's when we had the same identical ancestor at that point. So here is all the data scatter plotted, and that's over 1 million years roughly. We can see that Earth has been meandering and moving and assembling different locations on this 2D plane. And on the right, I have a color code. I'm encoding the date of each point by the color, but it's plotted on a logarithmic axis. So the more red or yellow points would be more recent, but as you go down to the cyan and blue, the time scale gets larger and larger. So right now, data only includes what happened before we started to burn coal around the 1750. And we can notice that, of course, Earth naturally wanders around and exhibit climate change at some rate. But over 1,000-year time scale, it barely moves around by a few tenths of ppm on the CO2 axis and a fraction of a degree Celsius on the temperature axis. But if we allowed 10 times more time, like 10,000 years, Earth would effectively sample the whole range that it appears to have access to naturally. So climate deniers usually use this natural variability as arguments that what we see today is also part of this natural trajectory, this natural progression of Earth. Except when we plot what happens after we start to burn coal, we notice two things. One is that the speed at which Earth is moving on this plane has dramatically accelerated. So it covered 10 times the distance on this plane in 10 times less time, which means it's moving at a speed which is 100 times faster than its natural speed. So that's unlikely to be natural. And also, it's certainly moving out of the general region in space that it used to be wandering around over history. And on the current trajectory within this CO2 plane, Earth is very quickly moving out of a region that traditionally or historically has supported life on Earth as we currently know it. And a review of the literature on the effect of CO2 on animals and plants, and also the effect of temperature on animals and plants, would indicate that the current trajectory is bringing the Earth system outside of the habitable zone, colored by green, within the next decade. And so I'm just giving a few examples of papers where the general figure is constructed, but of course there's hundreds of papers of which I consulted on the order of like tens for each of the lines indicated. And consensus is quite general. So plants need a certain level of CO2 in order to survive, because they need to synthesize sugar by taking sunlight and CO2. So we cannot go to infinitely low CO2 either. So there's a lower bound that's necessary to support life. On the higher end, at a certain point, carbonic acid would become so concentrated that it becomes corrosive and acidic. It turns out that for animals and plants generally, you want to stay below 2,000 ppm for sure, and 1,000 ppm if you can manage. So, but right now we're at halfway there from zero. We still have a way to go. What's more troubling is our trajectory with respect to the temperature axis. There are indications that even 1 degree Celsius rise can cause local extirpation of species, as many have pointed out. And 2 degree in the laboratory has consistently been shown to be very bad for all the plants and animal species, or not all, the majority that's been studied in the laboratory. And anything more than that is just unknown, but unlikely to be good if that ever happens. And people have used terms including biological annihilation, as Professor McPherson points out in his literature review, and the use of such terms should sound an alarm for people who are concerned for future well-being. So let's assume for a second that we can treat temperature and CO2 as separate variables, and let's examine like how much time we have until we cross the boundary for each of these variables. And with should be also clear from the previous slide that we're en route to hitting the thermal tolerance boundary in the coming decade or 2 or 3, but not much longer than that. Whereas if we basically follow the line and assuming that this continued the linear relationship between CO2 and temperature, we would only reach the CO2 boundary roughly a century from now. But of course, the average values, and both of these variables display some variance. So there could be some, a widening of these intervals, but that's the generally a valid temporal order of threats. And the interesting thing is that even if we burned all established global fossil fuel reserve, we wouldn't inject enough CO2 for the CO2 variable by itself to cause as much serious threat as the concurrent temperature would have caused. So if we could decouple these two variables, then we should really focus on tackling the temperature axis. And that should be clear now in this graph, that if we want to return the Earth system back to a region that's habitable, we need to take some trajectory, either going left and down, right or down, or all the way just following the origin trajectory straight down. We really need to induce some kind of negative mobility within this temperature CO2 axis. So that's the most urgent intervention that we should hope to achieve. Now, I will just quickly discuss this aerosol masking. I think Professor McPherson probably have talked about this before I joined today. But, burning fossil fuel, it's an addiction that we cannot let go of. And so here are two simulations of the effect, the cooling effect of aerosols that we currently have in the atmosphere. And the best estimate is that these aerosols currently are masking about 1.6 plus minus 0.2 watts of heating per square meter on the averaged over the entirety of Earth. That's a substantial amount of cooling. And if we take one quite recent estimate of the climate sensitivity based on historical data, we get temperature equivalents of 0.8 degrees Celsius for each watt per square meter of radiative forcing. So if we removed all existing anthropogenic aerosols, such as by stopping all fossil fuel use, we would be we could expect a 1.6 times 0.8 degrees Celsius rise in global temperature, which is certainly likely to be greater than 1 degree Celsius. And this heating would happen on time scale of roughly 3 to 5 years, which is the thermal time constant of the atmosphere and mixed ocean layer of planet Earth. I don't think our society and the world can handle another degree Celsius rise in temperature in the next 5 years if we have trouble dealing with the 1.5 that we have got already. And here is just a list of papers for people or listeners who are interested in learning more about the subject. Now let's consider why, well, with that knowledge of aerosol masking, you should be able to guess why simply going to renewables is not sufficient. So let's just do a thought experiment. Let's suppose that as of last month, the beginning of 2020, somehow Earth granted a wish, and some aliens visited us and said, "Okay, you Earthlings, you want to change to renewables? We'll help you." So that's what you only get to choose one of the technologies that you have. And here is a projection of such a scenario of instantaneous switching of the whole energy production to renewables and how that would affect the climate from now until 2100. So the effect of immediately switching is indicated by this cyan arrow going straight up. So basically, in 5 years from now, we can expect another, perhaps more, degree Celsius rise in temperature due to the loss of aerosol masking. And thereafter, we see that the different renewable energies will move the Earth system to a lesser extent on the CO2 axis, say compared to burning fossil fuel, which is reasonable, and it's intuitively correct because those facilities, the only emission would be associated with construction and making the material needed to make, say, silicon panels or the steel for the wind mills. And a windmill requires less infrastructure, so that's why it moves less to the right compared to, say, solar photovoltaics or solar thermal. But wind is a little special. If you look at its effect on the temperature axis, it actually goes up more than solar thermal or solar photovoltaic. That's because when the wind turbine is turning, when it's been pushed by air that's moving, there are two effects, additional physical effect that goes on. One is there's a frictional dissipation of the kinetic energy, like when you rub your hands together, or when you air current rubs against the blade, there's a heat dissipation. So that's been estimated to be about 1 watt per meter squared in the areas of generation. So that's a substantial amount of power of not radiative forcing, but thermal forcing, 1 watt per square meter. The other effect is that the wind turbine will facilitate the mixing of different layers of atmosphere. This is especially problematic during the night when the air close to ground is supposed to be cooled off. When wind turbine works during the night, it continues to turn up the atmosphere and bring hot air up down to the ground. So in cases when we, say, have a extreme heat event, the heat which persists for several days, if there's in addition a windmill close to you, then it'll be very bad because you don't even get relief during the night because the windmill will continue to turn down hot air to your bed when you're sleeping at night. So sustained thermal stress like that, potentially exacerbated by windmill, makes it questionable whether, especially wind, is something we want to pursue as a society. And I also want to point out the green arrows that represents what would happen if, say, we switch to 100% biofuel energy based on, say, growing some sort of trees, fast-growing trees, and extracting energy from the wood. So first of all, we do not have enough land on all of Earth to support the area of forests needed to grow the energy we consume. And of course, doing so would instantaneously fry our civilization. So as noble as the cause might be, and well-intentioned people might be in trying to promote trees, it's simply a solution that is just physically not possible to implement. Professor McPherson recently wrote an essay very concisely summarizing this and other problems and reasons why trees are not the answer. All right, so basically, in the end, solution could be very simple. It comes down to giving up on trying to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, but rather intercept its effect using a simple installation at ground level based on mirrors. I think this slide, despite its simplicity, actually requires a bit of explanation. So we'll just crunch a few numbers to make sure that we're on the same page. Currently, we have roughly 140 ppms of CO2 in excess of pre-industrial levels. And this amount of CO2 is giving about 3 watts per meter squared of radiative forcing. And if one does a quick calculation, converting the ppm to an actual mass of CO2 is 1 teraton of CO2. So how much does each ton of CO2, basically the black sphere you see, heats the Earth? You basically do 3 divided by 1 to the power 12, you get 3 to the minus 12 watts per meter squared per ton of CO2. Now let's look at the mirror side. So basically we want to find out the area of the mirror when exposed to sunlight would give you the inverse of that 3 e to the minus 12 watt per square meter of heating, square meter. Yeah, that's right. So in many areas of Earth, especially in basically all of the major deserts areas and many parts of the ocean, we have time averaged insolation of 80 watts per meter squared. And if, say, we just installed one mirror that's 1 meter squared in one of those locations, its effect averaged over the surface of the Earth would be the 280 watts per square meter divided by the total area of Earth, and that would give you like 0.55 to the minus 12 watts per meter squared of mirror. Then the question is like, how many square meters of mirror do you need in order to cancel the heating effect of 1 ton of CO2? Then you take the ratio of those two, and it turns out to be roughly 6 meters squared of mirror to cancel 1 ton of CO2. And 6 meters squared is 8 by 8 feet for people who are more comfortable with imperial units. And the cost for making such a thing, well, depends on how much profit you want to make off of it. But this glass, like 1/4 inch thick glass, can be sourced at roughly $1 US per square meter. Currently, it's commercially available. So something like that, if you the cost of the glass would be like $6, and of course there's some money the coating process. But that's commercial. But imagine if we were to, produce these things in a coordinated fashion globally, and go down by 10 times, 100 times. So a $10 cost is a very conservative estimate. And why do we want to use glass as the material to implement our infrastructure? Well, it's very simple to make. And it's like basically one-step process. For people who are into material processing, you really want to minimize the number of processing steps and complexity of each processing step. Glass consists of mixing several salts that have sodium, ions and silicon, and you just add heat and let everything melt together. And glass is also fabulous because it can be molded into different shapes. It's mechanically fairly robust, so it can also serve as a structural material, and it's chemically inert, which means it will last for a long time when you implement into the environment, in deserts, in the ocean. So durability, ease of fabrication, and versatility in the shapes that it can take are things that are beneficial. So here is a very quick order of things in temporal order that we need to be doing. We need to implement large arrays of mirror at a rate which is commensurate with our current emissions on an annual basis. So if we say emit 50 gigaton of CO2 per year, then we need to make, similar number of mirrors, as we discussed, to basically cancel additional heating effect, and that would cost anywhere from 50 to 500 billion per year, perhaps less, if we really can scale this thing and remove the need for profit from this equation. So that's certainly an amount that should be manageable at a global scale. And during this stabilization phase, when we are constructing mirrors in order to buy time for the transition, we need to also really push for renewable energies, and ideally based on concentrating solar thermal for several reasons, some of which we might not even have time to get into today. But imagine that we decided as a globe to mass manufacture mirrors. We would have a very nice infrastructure. Then it would be very much cheaper to make mirrors for all kinds of other purposes. So currently solar thermal energy is slightly more expensive, say, than photovoltaics, because it had a late start. And also it has late start, and then there's already established financial in the photovoltaic sector, which is one reason that's helped to kill off a better technology. So if we had a glass manufacturing facility and mirror manufacturing capability on large scale, we would be able to make concentrating solar thermal plants much more efficiently, much more cheaply. That should give it a boost. So during, say, the next 10 years, when we stabilize temperature by mirror, we should also have a political discussion, and hopefully to just subsidize this particular form of renewable energy generation. And at the same time, another threat that's will be actually happening during this time, I think on the order of 56 years from now, would be ocean acidification. And solar thermal energy is ideally suited also to combat this problem, because we can use limestone and use heat from sunlight to generate calcium oxide, which is quite basic. And you can use, in this case, use the ocean surface as the very efficient capturing medium. We capitalize on the huge surface area to ensure very fast equilibrium between atmospheric CO2 and ocean CO2. So we don't even need to invest in, say, advanced absorbents for CO2. Ocean has done the job for us. All we have to do is to scatter powders of the calcium oxide into this already concentrated CO2 in the ocean, and acid-base reaction ensures complete conversion. So for each mole, or each molecule, or say, each unit of calcium oxide you scatter into the ocean, we can expect 1.7 molecules of CO2 in a stable and basic form. That's very good for the growth of calcifying organisms that we and many other species depend on. So I think in fact, the mirror strategy, or a framework based on cheap materials such as glass, can be exploited and used in many different ways to solve many of the most urgent problems we have. The most urgent of which is, of course, planetary heating. So we can use mirrors to gain a planetary cryostat. We can also use mirrors in combining with the solar thermal energy for industrial processing to achieve ocean deacidification. And obviously, it's a very efficient way to make electricity, more so than photovoltaics in terms of equivalent CO2 emission per kilowatt hour of energy generated. Mirrors, floating mirror arrays can also be coupled to food production, as we will discuss later on a later slide. And it can be used for carbon dioxide capture, and we'll also go into a bit more detail later. And today we won't have the time to talk about the last item, which I think is a risk factor we need to be thinking of. That's the rising methane concentrations in the atmosphere. So even if, say, we manage to control a lot of the primary threats and most urgent threats, the complexity of the atmosphere and potential for nonlinear amplification of existing perturbations could mean that we have already crossed some threshold for sustained release of methane. And if that were the case, then we need to be thinking about after we have controlled the temperature, whether we can solve that problem. But that's probably topic for another discussion. So I'd like to then take the next few minutes to go into a little bit more detail on CO2 capture and circular or economy, circular food production, floating mirror arrays. So right now, there are a few companies that exist selling the ideas that it's possible to filter the air and recapture the CO2 from the air and store it away. I would like to say that, yes, it's scientifically possible, it's been demonstrated, but a plant like that, as you see in the picture, which is huge, has huge footprints. Right now it's capturing roughly, I think, the CO2 emission of 1 or 2 people. So you can imagine how many of such plants would be needed, and whether we have all the supporting infrastructure and metals to make such plants. That's to be questioned. And the approach of capturing CO2 from air is intrinsically problematic from a thermodynamics point of view. I mean, it's energetically feasible, but if you're sieving through, 1,000 or 2,000 molecules, and you're just picking one out of 2,000, it's a lot of work. And in thermodynamics terms, it's the entropy of mixing that we threw away while when we allowed, exhaust gas to freely mix with the atmosphere is a lot of energy we gave away. And in order to capture it back, we have to at least invest that much energy. And if one simply does a back of envelope calculation of the entropy of mixing that's we threw away, that's more than what we use in a year globally. So even if fantastically we had the perfect machine with 100% energy efficiency, we need to devote 1 year of global energy consumption to capture it back. But of course, the best demonstrated efficiency we have right now is like 5 to 6% efficiency, which means if we did nothing on Earth except for to capture CO2, we need 20 years to capture back the CO2 we already emitted. And 20 years, as we all know, is beyond the time we have left for large-scale action. So from a more larger picture perspective, air capture is not going to be a solution. So we already talked that one way to, time and to do this efficiently is to use mirrors to directly reject the heat. But of course, if we really wanted to, for some reason, capture back the CO2, and if we had this mirror infrastructure, we can then exploit using sunlight and use sunlight to do a lot of the energy generation by using the heat to decompose limestone and use the calcium oxide to do the neutralization and capturing in combination and with the help of the ocean. And even in tests, furnaces at lab scale, people have demonstrated 30% heat to chemical conversion efficiency a couple of years ago. So the cost estimate that's already like roughly 15 years ago for this technology was already less costly than the current cost for direct air capture. And there's substantial scope for the thermal decomposition approach and calcium oxide liming, ocean liming approach to go even lower if we scaled up the mirror infrastructure. And the calcium oxide is very nice. It dissolves quickly in the ocean once you scatter it in. There was a very talented master student last year who wrote a thesis studying the kinetics, the chemical changes taking place when you scatter calcium oxide into seawater. And basically particles of millimeter or hundreds of micrometer size would completely dissolve during its way sinking down into the ocean. For carbon capture and storage, you do it by filtering the air or directly through the ocean. There will be a point of net CO2 generation at the plant level that need to be buried, and that's a unsolved challenge globally. So that's a common challenge for all the carbon capture and storage. So in the grand scheme of things, carbon capture and storage is a secondary problem of secondary importance, because once we remove the heating effect of CO2, the remaining CO2 in the atmosphere at its current level is not going to have major measurable climatic impacts. And the only reason I can think of why you want to do this is to get the CO2 as a carbon source to make synthetic fuel. Let's say if we manage to run out of all the petroleum in our effort to build up this glass-based infrastructure. And one might ask where to get the calcium carbonate from for this ocean liming approach. It turns out that calcifying organisms like mussels, scallops, and many shells are made of a high concentration of calcium carbonate. And if you just take the shell and heat it to 800, 900 degrees Celsius, in this case, people they use 1,000 degrees, but in our lab we tested at 900. It works just fine. We got calcium oxide that's essentially pure. So that question is it possible to couple this food production through growing these seafood and the effort to deacidify ocean by ocean liming? So, well, first of all, let's do a thought experiment. Let's see how much oyster can one eat. So I went to market. I bought about 40 oysters, and to see whether it's possible to eat all of them in one sitting. It's actually possible. It's tasted pretty good. So that's how much shell you can produce in one meal. And you can take one of them and put into an oven, and of course you can produce very highly pure calcium oxide powder that you can use to neutralize sparkling water and just regular water, make it basic. So yeah, basic stuff that you can get from these shells. Now let's do a thought experiment. Let's assume that we feed the world exclusively using oysters. How much shell can we produce, and what can we do with that shell? Let's see. The important numbers include how much a person needs per day. We need each about 2,000 calories per person per day. And each kilogram of oyster meat gives about 500 calories per kilo. So each of us would need to eat about 4 kilos of oyster meat per day to get 2,000 calories. And in that process, as you saw on the last page, you produce a lot of shell. So the amount that you end up is 2 times that, so about 8 kilograms of shell per person per day. And we have a lot of people in the world. So on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line, we are almost 10 to the 10th. So you times anything by the 10 to the 10th is a huge number. So in the end, one can produce. So there's one typo, but we can produce 2.2 times 10 to the 10 tons of calcium oxide per year from all the waste shell that people consumed. And that amount of calcium oxide will essentially neutralize all current anthropogenic CO2 emissions. I mean, this exercise is quite illuminating in the sense that current emissions is a global problem caused by a multiplication of individual consumption to the total number of people. And when we design a solution that also leverages the number of people we have, such as eating oysters, we also get the same amplification by the number of people. So these two problems end up in the same order of magnitude. So that sort of makes sense, right, from a just intuitive way of looking at the problem. Okay. So farming oysters has been demonstrated in 3D, hanging off of floating buoy systems in the ocean. And we certainly have enough ocean surface, a lot more than that needed to feed the whole world. Even if, say, we were so ambitious as to want to return the climate back to 1750 baseline, we would need, in that case, 10 trillion meters squared of floating mirrors. But to farm oysters that would be needed to support the whole human race would only require 5.6 trillion meters squared, even if we were doing in 2D. So if we adopted these 3D infrastructure, we'll probably only need 1/10, perhaps most likely much less total surface area to farm oysters. And that also indicates that we would have excess floating mirrors to grow other things. For example, algae or seaweed, and even feed these primary producers or feeder or filter feeders to some other tastier organisms that would be more palatable to the culinarily inclined among us. So there is a hope for some decent food in the future. So here is just a conceptual illustration of what people can do. So even though we already reviewed that wind power is not a smart solution in principle, but it has a huge infrastructure and there are companies pushing for this technology. So it's inevitable that they would be implemented offshore, whether or not it's the most efficient way. So let's assume there are projects that will be implemented like these giant turbines up to, I think, 10 megawatts capacity. Then we can use them as basically anchoring points for floating mirror arrays. So I'm illustrating just 4 of those arrays in a linear projection. And in between them, you see this sort of inverted T-shaped thing. That's my just illustration of a floating and sinking actuator for the array. Because during the day you want, and in good weather, you want the mirrors floated in order to reject excess sunlight to keep the ocean cool, so organisms, including algae and fish, won't die because of heat stroke. But during the night, or if there's a storm, you want to sink your array so it's protected from climatic disturbances. And also, in the case of many species, they require concentration of nitrogen to grow. So when you submerge them into a deeper ocean, 100, 200 meters, nitrogen concentration goes up, so they get fertilization during the night. So this idea of going up and down, it's an old idea. I think, I read it in a book recently by Holly Jean Buck, referring to technology developed by, anyways, so the citation can be for the submerging the crop into the ocean layers can be found in this book. That came out last year. Okay, so here is basically a very quick accounting of the sizes of these installations. Each of those wind powers, let's say the newest, produced by GE, it's about 12 megawatts. And the curly arrows indicate, you know, the heating of atmosphere due to the two mechanisms of wind and friction losses. So each of these wind turbines would generate, you know, as much heat as is equivalent to 0.3 megaton of CO2 emissions. And in order to cancel that heating effect of the wind, you need 2 million 1 meter squared floating mirrors. And that when placed in a two-dimensional array would be about a square array of 2 miles on the side, and which is roughly, you know, the size that you would, or spacing you want to put these windmills anyways. So this could be one example of combined implementation that would be overall climate neutral, but in the end produces electricity and also gives seafood production and potentially offer thermal refuge to many species of fish underneath these infrastructures, except perhaps the whales or larger mammals that might be endangered by colliding into the tensioned array infrastructure. So I think that's enough discussion for today, and I will give it back to Jamen and for more discussions and questions if we need.
Wow, very, very good, Ye. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that detailed presentation. Wow, it's great to see so many people here. Looks like we've got a good 25 people participating live online. Welcome, Uncle Frank. Good to see you. And welcome, everyone. So you know, here's some of my first thoughts. I'm just blown away by the amount of innovation that you have been able to crank out. I know you're not alone there at the Roland Institute. I know notably you have Chris Stokes and other colleagues to collaborate with, but just with a relatively small group of people, look at the ideas you've been able to generate, right? Now consider that bringing planetary collective intelligence to this, we can have a huge acceleration in the innovation needed to really fine tune a lot of these solutions and generate additional solutions. I'm very impressed by the way you've been able to look at this holistically and look at ways to both cool the planet through solar radiation management, sequester carbon, grow food, just all these, generate electricity. So I'm really impressed and grateful that you're thinking about this so holistically.
Thanks for the kind words, but I want to mention that this work is not like my work of me, right? So what I've done is to actually stand on the shoulders of thousands of millions of scientists who devote their lives to studying very specific aspects of science or just single organism or single life cycle of a particular organism, right? So it would be wrong to attribute whatever synthesis or new insights I gained to me. It's the work of everybody in the scientific community, many of which will probably remain nameless to the world as we enjoy the modern amenities. So I want to also take this opportunity to thank all the colleagues working around the globe, knowingly or unknowingly helping our species to have a fighting chance. And of course, everybody here, you're, I'm sure, active in your respective domains and doing what you can to help solve this problem that concerns everybody. And Professor McPherson and Jamen for your leadership in your respective areas of expertise.
Thank you, Ye. You're very kind. Thank you. So building on that with a proper platform, community, and culture of collective intelligence, one of our theses, speaking of our areas of expertise in collective superintelligence, we have the potential to greatly accelerate this innovation. And one other realm of innovation that is particularly relevant right now is how do we get humanity as a whole to wake up to the urgency of cooling the planet, right? And humanity as a whole wrapping our collective minds around this and making this a popular topic and something that humanity as a whole is passionate about, I believe is going to be vital for getting the governments of the world to come together and support this in a huge way. We're definitely going to need huge government support, huge private sector, academic support, et cetera. So in addition to the scientific and technical and engineering solutions that we've been talking about, we also need cultural, media, and political solutions. And that's a big focus of the collective intelligence, is how do we get the world to wake up and really focus on this. Anyway, I would love to hear from Guy. Guy and a lot of folks have been asking to hear your thoughts on all this. And then perhaps afterwards we can open it up for just some more general discussion. So Guy, whenever you're ready, please take the microphone. And we've got a lot of questions also coming in through chat. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jamen, and thank you especially, Ye. That was a brilliant presentation, and your genius continues to impress. And I know with typical scientific humility, you give credit to other people, but your ability to synthesize the information is critical and impressive. It seems to me that we have, in addition to the technical issues, which I think, Ye, you have addressed nicely and that don't seem overwhelming, we have a political issue. And scientists are probably the worst people on earth when it comes to pointing the way to overcome political obstacles and to deal with political issues. Even Einstein said when the technology he greatly contributed to was used to build nuclear bombs, Einstein said, had I known what they were going to do with it, I would have become a shoemaker. And that's just an indication of the relative inability of scientists to influence the political process. So the big question for me is not for Dr. Tao, it's for the rest of us. How do we get this? How do we get this information, this relatively straightforward, seemingly pretty simple technology into the heads of the people who pull the strings of empire so that we can take action more or less immediately. I mean, I'm a big fan of oysters, lots of them, and I'm willing to make that sort of sacrifice, as I think many of us are. But then what? You know, we need to scale up from the individual level, obviously, to the political, societal level. And I don't know how to do that. And I've never figured that out. And it's one of the great failings of, in my opinion, the scientific community.
Yeah. No, absolutely correct, Guy. And in fact, that was what the problem or the predicament that you're describing was a big part of our motivation to create collective intelligence and to dare to dream of a planetary collective superintelligence. So right now, all of us right here in the Zoom video conference, we're participating in collective intelligence. we can all see and hear each other, and we're putting our heads together and bouncing different ideas around. And imagine this video conference room, but multiplied by thousands, eventually millions, when humanity as a whole says, wait a second, it's up to all of us to come up with all of the solutions that we need. Political solutions, cultural solutions, media solutions, etc. And so I believe that literally right in front of us, what we're experiencing right here on the computer screen is the beginning of a major planetary movement, and in fact, a phase shift in humanity to go from the relative isolationism in which we've been living and operating to operating as a collective. Imagine, I mean, just dare to dream. Look, you know, half the world's connected to the internet in one way or another right now. Dare to dream of humanity daring to come together through video conferences such as this, but across a vast spectrum of topics in a way that's organized. And, you know, I've talked about this quite a bit on various video conferences, and that's not the topic of this 2-hour period, but I just want to make a plug addressing your comments, Guy, that planetary collective intelligence is a very real thing that's growing very quickly. And in fact, the whole block party is designed to really launch this. So here we are, standing on the edge of a future that could be either a very bright future or a very dismal future. And I believe it will depend upon humanity coming together and really manifesting this collective intelligence to bring forth our latent power and potential to organize ourselves so that we can bubble these brilliant solutions, such as what Dr. Tao has been introducing to us. Bubble these solutions to the top so they become the nightly news. They become what everyone's discussing at the water cooler, at work, at school, on the playground, and saying, hey, we need to do this. So let's all jump into the collective intelligence to figure out all of the myriad solutions and components of solutions that will make all this a reality.
Yes, I agree, and I hate to be the Donnie Downer again, but humanity has never come together in the face of an existential crisis. Look at the second Iraq War. 99% of the people on the planet thought that was a terrible idea, and the half a dozen people who pull the strings of empire thought it was a good idea. So away goes the United States, leading the coalition of the bribed, the needing the US empire to support them. And we go into Iraq and Kuwait and on and on. And, you know, this is hardly the first time that the wishes of the people, we go all the way back to the entire period of the American Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s. And the government of the United States and the governments of the world doing exactly the opposite of what the majority of people desired. We have somebody, Jorge? Jorge, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, thank you, Professor McPherson. First, I want to thank the wonderful presentation to Dr. Tao. I will definitely have to work hard to comprehend all of it because I am no scientist and I don't understand much of the figures and the data presented, but it will take time only to understand it and comprehend it fully. I just want to mention that I noticed the appreciation of what appalling it is to plant trees, no, as a natural solution. And on that, I would like to say that I completely agree with Dr. Tao that planting trees is something that is not going to help at all. Having said that, what I advocate for and what my partner and I are proposing as a natural solution is growing forests, which is not the same as planting trees. I don't know if anybody has been into a primary forest in their lives. It's not the same as a monoculture plantation called forest. So our project is Free Food for Future. And the way to do that is to run a program that requires awareness-based collective action, which is not the same as, okay, in masses go out and plant monoculture of one species of trees. What we're proposing is a worldwide community food forest. And in this fashion, we're avoiding the appalling idea of planting trees, because planting trees is not the same as planting forests. We need forests that grow people, exactly for the same reason as Professor McPherson is referring to the inability of genius scientists, professors, and doctors to influence on politics. We need a humanity that need not be awakened. And the best way to do that is to reconnect with nature. It has been proven that the lack of connection to nature has got us to the point that we are in right now. 8,000 years ago, 50% of the planet was covered in some sort of forest or jungle. We can go back to that. We can work with nature, and there's a new approach called convivial conservation, and it's the best theoretical platform, theory, new paradigm that I can think of. That and permaculture. In permaculture, we have this thing called the edge effect, and that is what I noticed that is happening in the collective intelligence sessions run by Radish, and the one that we're on right now. This opportunity to converse and to grow by listening to a complete different approach to solve things in the planet, it is similar to the permaculture edge effect, where two environments overlap or coincide, that generates a much richer diversity, biodiversity. And thank you for the opportunity to share this. I would like to keep hearing everybody else's perspectives.
Beautiful, Jorge. Thank you so much. Can we bring that back, Nolan, real quick? Because I need to see something. We have a couple of folks with their hands up. Paul has had his hand up, followed by Daniel. And if anyone else would like to talk, there's a way to raise your hand electronically, but also feel free to just wave or even type into the chat. Okay, I see Nathan also wants to talk. So we got Paul, followed by Daniel, followed by Nathan, followed by Richard. All right, please take it away, Paul.
Is my mic working?
Yes, sir, it is. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. I'm Paul Dworkin. I work with the Climate Coalition here in Massachusetts. I'm a friend of Dr. Tao's. And I wanted to share my experience about what the challenge is. It is, as we say, not technical, and I don't think it's even informational. When we go door to door and talk to people, you know, to make pitches, every single person agrees that this is vital, important. They know the information, yet somehow no one moves. All of the people in public. There's us, who is a very small minority, and then there's all the people who are busy with their lives, and maybe this is fifth on their list, but it ain't first. And politicians move when most of the people demand it. So what's going on? The issue is emotional. The issue is not getting across more scientific information or educating or teaching. People are emotionally paralyzed. It seems like the fear of the thing, the daunting prospect of the size of the project is sufficient to cause people to be unable to address it. I'm not sure what we do about this, but all this discussion of what the technical solution is, you know, if people are ready for a moonshot, you'll get a moonshot, but they're not. And we can talk about, if you want something to happen in the next 10 years, which is an insanely fast thing for anything for humanity to do, you need to find a way to address this emotional paralysis. You need to give people a story that is optimistic that they are part of. This is our experience trying to sell various things. We get nowhere. We get a few people, right? Those are not the people we need to convince. If you're talking about getting 1 million people in 1 million conversations, most people are just trying to get through their lives. You are not going to turn them into grand thinkers. You need to get them to accept and to push for this thing. That's been my experience, and I would like to hear discussion of it.
Beautiful. You raise a really good point. I'll just give a super quick response because we got a lot of people waiting to speak. But basically, even if we had even 1% of humanity participating in collective intelligence, that's close to 80 million people. Look at the power of having 25 of us here on a Zoom video conference. The power of tens of millions of people participating in a modern form of collective superintelligence is something humanity has never experienced. This is going to be something totally new in the human experience. So we have yet to behold the power of collective superintelligence. We're just getting a tiny appetizer of it right now. With that, I'd like to pass to Daniel, who's been waiting. Go ahead, Daniel, take it away.
Hi. Thank you. Just real quick, I just wanted to point out half the emissions that have been put in the atmosphere have been after Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. So all this bottom up, bubbling up, like trying to hope that things are going to change. Our government has failed, right? Like they've failed. They're not going to act. They've got too much skin in the game. The Green New Deal is net zero by 2050, right? It's a Disneyland fantasy that the Green New Deal, and that's the progressive. That's what the progressives want, is net zero by 2050. I just and I think the people just aren't aware, right? I mean, Americans, they think it's about the Amazon or about polar bears, right? We need to fill up the jails. We need to do civil disobedience and fill up the jails. But yeah, that's just my input. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate everything. I actually learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate your comments. Just a quick comment on governments. I totally agree with you, Daniel. The governments of the world are completely corrupt, completely broken, and rapidly becoming the laughingstock of humanity. Collective superintelligence, which we're manifesting right here and growing right here through the Block Party, has the potential to completely eclipse, orchestrate, and ultimately replace and transform not only governments, but governance generally. So lots to be hopeful for. Lots definitely to be sobered about, Daniel. Totally agree with you there. And thank you for your plug about civil disobedience. That's certainly an important element of the equation. Thank you. Nathan's been waiting patiently. Nathan, take it away.
Okay, thanks. Hey, thanks for facilitating this, Jamen and Guy and Yi and your colleague Paul. How close are you to be able to doing a field test of this? I know that the territorial waters issue, how far out to sea are you thinking we're going to have to go with this? The scale, I imagine, is going to have to be massive. I know there's at least one state in the Northeast where the people are losing their oceanfront properties and they're having to move them back to the back of wherever the subdivision that they're at is. I don't know if that's Massachusetts that's happening or Maine, but how close are you to be able to prove your theory and actually do some mirrors and the oyster cultures and whatnot? And are we going to have, do we have any contacts where we could make this happen sometime in the next 6 months to a year at the most? Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Nathan. Yay?
Okay, so I guess that's a question addressed to me. So as I pointed out in my presentation, solving climate change is not currently in my job description during my regular working hours. It's more of a after work and weekend project after I have dealt with other responsibility that I have with respect to my students and colleagues. So we only have had on the order of like 1 or 2 years to really work on the concept and the literature review and very small scale model production. And whether or not the concept will work is actually not very difficult to demonstrate scientifically, because the physics involved is rather rudimentary. And simulations similar to the type of work we are proposing has been already done, and results are known for over a decade that yes, it will be effective in cooling. There's no doubt about that. And any secondary effect, including cloud feedbacks, etc., will be minor compared to the primary cooling by the primary reflection of sunlight. And the way I see for getting the project implemented, there are several urgent steps we need to do. One is education of the public about this different way of looking at the problem. Just shift the attention away from this fixation on CO2. That hopefully will clear a lot of the roadblocks politically or economically or commercially, because we wouldn't be fighting against powerful interests, and may actually have these companies that's in control as our allies, because the implementation of any large-scale projects like this will necessarily create opportunities for more energy consumption, and in the short term, more employment opportunities. Right? So first step that's urgent is to spread the idea and make it aware to the public. And concurrently, on a small scale, for funding like really the key experiments, for example, at lab scale in my lab, it's funding on the order of a few $1 million and the time scale of a year, let's say, to have definitive results. And that's potentially very easily achievable through communities such as this, if we can just reach a few key people who are interested in catalyzing the process. And now coming back to the science, there is many different interesting applications, including using mirrors to tackle urban heat island effect in many cities around the world. And it's been shown through actual experiments that if you have neighborhoods in the same city, one of which has, wider roads, wider roofs, another one has darker ones, you can measure extremely large temperature differences during the day for like 0.1 change in albedo. So basically, if one neighborhood reflects 10% more light than another darker neighborhood, the lighter colored neighborhood could be 2 to 7 degrees Celsius cooler in the summer compared to the darker one. So even from a financial and energy saving point of view, if we can at the same time educating people about this mirror and encourage some citizens who are concerned to also use this as a way to improve their own living space and save energy, that could be a very nice way to introduce the concept to the public. And glass mirrors, I think it's very robust against corrosion, etc. If we design it properly, you can expect service life of decades. Most certainly better than most roofing materials in use today. right? So that's one way to introduce the technology to the people, so they will see it's just glass, it's mirrors, it's not harmful to the environment. It certainly is not, right? Even if we were to deploy these on large scales, say in the ocean, the rate at which these infrastructure would, say, potentially add extra atoms or materials into the ocean, it's at the rate at which glass dissolves into the ocean water. And the resulting ions like silicon, oxygen, these are things that's naturally found in ocean water. So from environmental point of view, it's intrinsically low risk. And if we can introduce these materials into people's lives and let them see the climatic and energetic benefit, I think there would be, it would be an easy way to get popular support and also get people's, help them become aware. And also importantly, this proposal is drastically different from, I think, to the best of my knowledge, previous proposals, in that we do not require at all CO2 emission reductions. In fact, I don't think we can, have the infrastructure implemented without fossil fuel powering our current existing infrastructure. So that's a key point, a takeaway.
Thank you very much. Just my last thought, and I know there's a lot of people on. I saw New Orleans just built a seawall going out 8 miles from the New Orleans beach or whatever, waterfront. Something similar, your mirrors could be incorporated into seawalls that, the fences that we're gonna have to build to combat sea level rise. But thank you so much for the thorough explanation, and I'll certainly do anything that I can do to help on my end with print media, videos, whatever. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you for being part of the collective intelligence. We've got a few people in the queue. Guy, I want to give you priority to please jump the queue, since many people are here to listen to you as well. So just jump in whenever you feel like it, Guy. Meanwhile, in the queue, we have Richard Chen, followed by Miles, followed by Dylan, followed by Melissa. So Richard, please take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Creating a good business plan allows you to communicate your proposal to venture capitalists in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And these guys obviously has a lot of money, right? And some of them are willing to invest in things that's not obviously money oriented, all right? Because after all, like Bill Gates, right? He's giving money away to make vaccines for Africa. He's doing a charitable thing. So that, and their language on proposal is the business plan. All right, because that's the way they communicate. That's the way they evaluate startup projects. So, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to work on coming up with business plan in the language of the venture capitalists. So that's my recommendation. The other question I have is approximately what percentage or fraction of the ocean needs to be covered with mirrors?
So I guess that's a question addressed to me. Thank you very much for the suggestion for getting venture capitalist money. I think, yeah, that's certainly one strategy we should be thinking of pursuing. And all of you here joining the meeting, and if you have friends and who are happy or have time to help in that front, we're more than welcome to have you support us and be part of the team. So in terms of the area of ocean that's needed, so I have to yet to punch number for the just maintenance level. So there's different ways and different scales on which you can implement mirrors, right? You can either choose to basically keep current temperature stable, or we can be ambitious in trying to cool it down back to 1750 baseline. So the calculation I did for cooling down to 1750 baseline is about 2% of ocean surface. But of course, well, I don't think that's the wise thing to do. And I don't think that's the most optimal path. It's just enough to keep current temperatures while we decarbonize. And for that, it's a small fraction of that. So it's a point something percent, maybe 0.1% per or less per year on that basis. And that can be then coupled to this moving agriculture off of land. So I want to then also use this opportunity to address Jorge's comment about biodiversity and rebuilding forests. And I think forests certainly provide a lot of ecosystem services other than just energy, right? It's biodiversity itself, having many, many different species occupying different levels of the different biological niche is important for the overall health and resilience of the ecosystem against perturbations. And that's been observed over and over and over again in different ecosystems on Earth, in oceans, on land. So the more diverse and your system is, the more stable it is against perturbations. And right now, people here should be aware that on land, the decay in biodiversity is especially bad. And in part, it's because of our need as humans to eat. And we have to just take away land and portions and carve out areas of forest to grow food. And in doing so, we isolate ecosystems, and the small patches of forest, sometimes when they're isolated, they just deteriorate. And it seems like the best way to build up forest, as Jorge suggests, is just to leave nature alone. Even, maybe you don't disagree, but that's my understanding based on my reading of the literature, that even say minor disturbance, say you farm like 5%, no, you harvest like 5% or 2% of trees in a forest and do nothing else. And that's enough to have impact that's more than just single-digit percent. So the initial disturbance is nonlinear in the sense a tiny infringement on nature can cause more than a tiny impact on biodiversity and ecosystem health. So if we were really serious about trying to build biodiversity back on land-based forests, we simply need to move agriculture off of land, because that's the single most user of land space. So I hope that I have addressed Richard's comment and part of Jorge's comment, but certainly we need to build up that biodiversity. And one way to do that in interim is to give the space back to nature.
Very good. All right, before we move to the next person in the queue, I'd like to invite Guy to talk about biodiversity as an expert conservation biologist, and to what extent will just cooling the planet itself and perhaps other factors impact conservation of biodiversity?
Well, they certainly won't hurt. We have to bear in mind that we've lost an enormous amount of biodiversity already, and that's not coming back. Extinction is forever, as nearly as we can tell. So, as Dr. Tao pointed out, it only takes a relatively minor disturbance to reasonably intact ecosystems to cause severe disruption of those ecosystems. And we've done a lot more in almost all of the world's ecosystems than make minor impacts. So the many, many, many species we've lost so far to the ongoing mass extinction event are not coming back. Will we be able to reduce the number of species gone extinct in the future? Perhaps by cooling the planet, reducing the human impact on the lands and waters of the world, we can. Perhaps. But that's certainly where we need to go, and that's completely consistent with cooling the planet starting immediately.
Beautiful. Thank you, Guy. All righty. Up in the queue, we've got Miles, followed by Dylan, followed by Melissa. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, thank you, Jamen. And thank you, Dr. Tao and Dr. McPherson for joining us today. My question is, well, first of all, one thing I'd like to float out to everybody is, sometimes perhaps if we connect, as someone said, emotionally with people, we're going to have a better chance of getting them to wake up. And for me, what was really emotional, and I'm not sure, I perhaps heard it from Dr. McPherson first, at some point, not too long ago, I was shocked to learn that we're having an insect population collapse. And then I'm like, well, yeah, how much insect repellent did I have to buy last year? And how many times did I have to put windshield washer fluid into my car? And I'm thinking, that's right, there's not nearly the insects that used to be splattered on my windshield. And that really still does, shocks the hell out of me. And I can relate to that. I don't need anybody to tell me how many insects have declined, because I see for myself the effect on the fact that they're missing on my windshield. So talking about carbon dioxide, though, it's a different thing because I can't see carbon dioxide and I can't really relate to it. So I suggest maybe we also put information forward in very easily and emotional types of frames for people to grasp. And, I'm concerned because, we can't even seem to figure out why all the insects are disappearing. So, if we can't figure that out, we've got real big problems. So I'm in Canada, and we have some real serious political instability right now. Some governance instability is coming to the fore. You might have heard right now as I speak, there's railroads being blockaded. There's a couple of pipelines through British Columbia that are trying to be built. And one of them is a natural gas line through to the Pacific coast. And the indigenous population, who have never ceded their territory in accordance with the rules of the Crown, that's why I'm interested in writing the Crown and the Queen, is to try to offer solutions. Now, is there a geographical ideal location for putting these mirrors in? Because if the north would be an adequate location or an appropriate location, I actually was inspired by Jamen and his social club a couple of years ago to attend a meeting. And I gave a letter to a gentleman named Nathan Obed. He is the indigenous leader of an organization called the Inuit Tapirit Kanatami. And he's essentially the spokesperson for all of the Inuit of northern Canada. And Nunavut is a new relatively new since 1999 territory. And it encompasses the Canadian archipelago right up to essentially the North Pole. It consists of if we convert kilometers to square meters, it consists of 2 billion square meters and of land, and total land and water rather. Now, water area of 160,000 square kilometers could include, I suppose, if you added as well, the Hudson's Bay. So very long-winded prelude to the question. would that territory be useful for these mirrors? And the reason I present it as well is there's only about 40,000 people live up there. So in other words, to get the Inuit people to say, this might be what we need, oyster beds, mirrors, and you only have to convince 40,000 people. Thank you.
So I believe that's a question for me. I was also trying to get more slides from another computer. I'm using a different one to make slides in this one. So give me like just a minute to pull up some slides.
And while you're digging for that, I'll just comment. I mean, the mirrors could be anywhere in the world from the standpoint of the total heat balance. Obviously, in the summer months, the mirrors are going to be most effective north of the equator and vice versa. But there's also some potential for some interesting local effects like refreezing polar ice. It would probably benefit to have the mirrors closer to the poles for that purpose, for have localized cooling as well as planetary cooling.
Yeah.
Glad that I never did follow up with this gentleman, Nathan Obed. I'd mentioned Radish to him, and that Radish is very interested in solving the warming, and the people of the north are experiencing even greater warming than most of the planet. They're already, I don't know, a couple of degrees or 3 degrees more than normal. And he said, yes, they're very interested in whatever we might do. So he is a man of influence and potentially follow up with.
Can I take it from here, Jamin?
Please, take it away,
Okay, can you guys see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so so the anecdotal observation of insects has been brought up, and I think to the best of my knowledge, there's a couple of peer-reviewed publications on that topic, and one was carried out in Germany, the other in Central South America. So so on the left, you see a contraption that's used as a way to collect insect biomass, and the people that did this work did that for the past, almost 30 years. And as you can see on the right, the amount of insect they caught declined steadily over time. And a fit to exponential decay to this data suggests that the half-life now of insects in that location seems to be 12 years. So basically every decade, the number of insects, assuming they're the same size, decreased by half, and that's a very rapid rate of decay. And basically the same decay rate has been observed in the other paper published in PNAS. In this case, there was a bit more spread in the decay time constant for a different method of catch, whether you're doing it on the ground or in midair, I think. But the averaged result is in agreement with the German data on the other side of the Atlantic. So admitted, we have very limited peer-reviewed data on this topic of what's happening to insect biomass, but the ones that the two that we have seems to indicate that they are in trouble. And in terms of species loss, local extinctions of other different animals, they're not doing much better since roughly the same time as 1970s, 1980s, when the heating really took off. So there might be some correlation with temperature increase, but there's no causal demonstration at planetary level beyond what we can observe in individual laboratories. So that's to address the question of anecdotal observation of insects. And yes, there is data to support your personal experience. and it's not looking good. So basically every 10 years, you'll have half as much. And next year, you'll have 25%, and another 10 years, only like roughly 10%. So in a couple more decades, we can expect to not find insects readily at the current rate of decline. And in terms of location of implementation for the mirrors, it turns out that near the equator, to be more efficient per unit of mirror installed, simply because you have more sunlight over the year, and the mirrors are passive devices. They only work when there is sunlight shining on them. So in terms of bang for your buck, it's better to put them around the equator. But of course, they would also work near the poles by the same mechanism, only at slightly lower wattage compared to when they're installed around the equator. And it might be important to realize that there are important co-benefits to installing these mirrors aside from just the cooling. Ecosystems in some, say, areas, especially in oceans that are overheating, are expected to get better when there's less heat to stress the animals. Right now, we see gigantic waves of migration of marine animals from equator up to the north, and that's wreaking havoc around ecosystems in the northern and far south latitudes, because like migrants, they, for example, different types of fish, tiny prey fish, they inundate the north, and the birds that prey on these tiny fish, they cannot distinguish between their preferred ancestral food and the newcomers. And sometimes newcomers are less nutritious than the resident tiny fish. So they eat the wrong food, which are less nutritious, and they starve as a result of eating less nutritious food. So installing the mirrors around equatorial regions is, first of all, more efficient per unit of mirror deployed in cooling, total planetary cooling. And secondly, it will also alleviate thermal stress in the most thermally stressed locations currently on Earth. And that's for ecosystem level, but one can also imagine reducing water evaporation rates in human settlement areas, and thus promoting, say, local agriculture in, say, areas that traditionally are too hot to support human agriculture. So I think as to the optimal way to implement mirrors in location and in quantity, we'd have to collaborate with the climate simulation scientists who have expertise in predicting the effect of these albedo modifications for precipitation patterns, temperature patterns, in order to find the optimal locations in order to have the most equitable impact for communities around Earth. And of course, a very important step in solving this climate crisis is recognizing the injustice that has happened to human societies around the world since centuries, through colonialism and continued colonialism in the form of financial markets that's not just in any sense. So I think organizations such as Radish, or the efforts to promote equal distribution or broad dissemination of knowledge can have a role in, first of all, making people aware of the existence of such injustice, and that regardless of how cruel or unfair ancestors of certain branches of people or had been in the past, right now we're all in this together. It's probably time to set aside also historical misunderstanding and injustices by acknowledging them, but also acknowledge that now we are all confronted by this single threat that we need to considered a potential leverage as a unifying force. So there will be sacrifices by some, the privileged, but it will only be temporary. And financial sacrifice may not mean sacrifice in your happiness. In fact, it's more than likely that by doing so, by promoting equity and a redistribution of resources, we can globally increase happiness for all people involved. So with this sort of, more ideal political climate, it will be then possible to really get all the scientists in different fields involved in order to optimize using our best computers, our best simulation systems, the locations for implementation, and have a global infrastructure and distribution network of resources to compensate for people who will have to give up their land or location, their ancestral home, for the good of humanity. But overall, the impact of solar radiation management through mirrors can only be positive. Very positive. So even for people who will be forced to temporarily move, it's better to move now than to, starve or of hunger or die from thirst a few years down the road. So temporary inconvenience, I think in this case, is minor compared to the long-term gain that all of us can, hope to derive from this effort to collaborate and come to the understanding that we are from the same family. As I discussed 100,000 years ago, we had the same ancestors. So I think brothers and sisters of Earth, we're all the same. Let's just work together and solve this thing.
Beautiful. Yay. We're all applauding over here, and I think around the world. Absolutely correct. That data that you showed on the insect populations, just absolutely shocking. I had not seen that graph before. Total insect mass, a half-life of 12 years. Guy McPherson does a pretty good job of shocking me, but I hadn't seen that particular statistic. And this just reminds me, as Guy in particular, as this is his life work to largely catalog all this. I mean, the picture is so insanely bleak. The very fact that humanity is going on with business as usual in 2020 with this degree of omnicide and mass extinction is absolutely mind-blowing. The only explanation that I can think of is that the governments and the major media, which are the main disseminators of information to the massive population, they are so addicted to this quarter's and this year's profits that they are simply on this endless treadmill of promoting their advertisers. And to do that, they need to promote a picture of the world that basically everything is fine. Hey, go out and get that new car and take that vacation and buy those new clothes and this new gadget and whatnot. Guy, I'd love for you to comment on that. And also with, we've got a couple of folks in the queue, but Guy, I know you'd please take it away, Guy.
Well, just quickly, we've known about the insect apocalypse, starting with the study in Germany, 3 years ago, something like that. And then more recently in Puerto Rico about a year ago. And those are two very different ecosystems. This is why this is so important. In Germany, they were in nature reserves. So they were relatively untrammeled locations that were sampled there. And then in Puerto Rico, it's in an area that is, all the study sites were in areas that are very developed, I would argue overdeveloped at this point. And so, the Eastern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, a relatively undeveloped area, an overly developed area, the story is the same. And now we're starting to see the results of what's called splat tests. That is the number of insects that splatter on your windshield. And it all points to the same thing. you know, there are now half a dozen at least climate change related phenomena leading to extinction, not just of our species, but of all life on Earth. This is just one of a handful of them at this point. So the situation is truly dire. I'm frequently accused of being an alarmist. The situation is alarming.
And in response to that alarming situation that we are seeing, those of us who dare to look and have the resources to be a part of this conversation, it is so shocking. So all of this actually gives me hope that we can exponentially grow our collective superintelligence. And when folks like Nathan, if I understood you correctly, Nathan saying, hey, what can I do? I can help with graphic design and other areas. This is exactly the kind of stone soup contribution that thousands and then millions of us can make. And we can come up with the compelling media, a 60-second video that goes viral, that just nails it. Where the heck is that? It's for us to co-create that. Love this conversation. Dylan, you've been waiting patiently, followed by Melissa. Dylan, please take it away.
Thank you, everyone. That was a very uplifting presentation, Yi. And thank you, Professor, for being on with us too, Guy. And I wanted to put out a few points to Yi, just a little bit of the structure of deploying this on a very global scale. Just a little bit of where I'm coming from. I'm a member of a humanitarian philanthropy group that are dedicating resources to making some serious changes with a collection of others. And I wanted to say that I think a majority of this project could be funded purely from the private sector. I would definitely look to that sector more so than the political sector, government sectors, because they're all bottlenecked. But I think there could be quite a great way to structure everything in the private sector, in a few different ways, whether it's straight out donations or if there's any thoughts on carbon credits or using that form to get businesses engaged with us. I wanted to pose a few points to Yi. As far as your business structure, are you going to be looking to creating this as a nonprofit entity? Like, where would funding be going to start investing in your teams to getting these modelings done and some small scale, operational capital just to get a cohesive core going to start really activating marketing, like you're saying, creating media that can just quickly show this vision in a few minutes. So all that, I would love to kind of hear more of your strategy. And of course, we would love to get involved with you directly. And also just on some other points that were brought up, just the idea of the emotions involved with the entire situation. I know from working with Guy's work for many years now, it's a very perilous journey to really unveil all this knowledge. And, I was lucky to have a few years with it. A lot of people are going to be hit with this pretty hard. And I think something you mentioned earlier was the idea that, we had this major problem and we never had a full solution to be like, oh, we have this major problem and but we have no solution. So it kind of, that curl up ball reaction comes up where you just don't know what to do and it's very daunting. But having this as a paired solution that you're bringing about, it's a much better way to sell something or tell a story where you're offering some dire information, but then you're offering a very cohesive, solid solution, accumulating all these different thoughts into one solution. Especially, I was really interested in and also maybe Guy's feedback on this, but the idea of using the aqua permaculture, algae blooming on the surface with the Climate Foundation, having that as part of that, bringing that nutrients from deep ocean up, creating those ecosystems on the surface again, and also being a carbon sink, capturing carbon on that large scale on the surfaces of the oceans while reflecting sunlight sounds like an incredible win-win of reflecting solar radiation and then being a carbon sink, using the oceans as that effect. So I just love that combination of solutions in this solution. So, and I just have one final thing, I guess, for the oceans, how would shipping lanes be taken into account and things of that nature? You know, I'm sure there's a lot of international, you know, legal stuff that would have to go into this as far as, you know, outlining regions that, you know, can be common heritage, environmental, geoengineering type sites. So I know that's a lot of points that I threw out there, but if you could comment, Guy or Yi, it would be great to have your comments. And I'm excited to move forward any way I can.
Awesome, Dylan. So happy to have you here. And brilliant comments. This is collective intelligence, everyone. So great example, Dylan. And by the way, Yay, his name is pronounced Yay, like yay.
Thank you.
Along with the good news he's providing to us all. All right, Yay and Guy, take it away.
So should I go first? Okay, sure. So there was a lot of questions, and it's very nice hearing from you. I think your experience in the field just come through how you talk about the issue. So I'm excited to, looking forward to working with you and connecting with you after this meeting. So
100%.
business. Thank you. So until like 2 or 3 years ago, I was, you know, like many other scientists, deep in my little hole and trying to solve one small question. So it turns out like my original research, we're trying to develop a MRI machine, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, that can give atomic resolutions. So we were working on the extreme small, like atomic level. So, and then got into climate change, and apparently now we need to, or I need to reinvent our team from a purely academic group to, say, leverage all the mechanisms that exist in current society to make the findings impactful. So going forward, I think it makes sense for us to form some sort of nonprofit or dedicated research institute to both really develop the required pieces of missing technologies for this to be reliable and durable. And I think if I were to be involved in administering this institute, there would be a few key values that we would adhere to. We would be completely open about our finances, to the point that we would make it available for people to download and look at.
Public, right?
Public, yes. And certainly we'll have our mission statement as to serve humanity and the pursuit of happiness for all people on Earth. And we would also like to impose a sort of salary remuneration structure where we would have, upper limits on how much people working for such a non-profit could gain. And I think as our vision of a future world that's sustainable, for example, it's incomprehensible why somebody could earn an order of magnitude more than another person. There's no other metric, biological or otherwise, between individual humans that warrants such a difference. So we would be completely open and transparent with our finances, and any financial resource we have would be completely dedicated to the mission statement. And that's up for scrutiny for people participating in helping this organization and working to promote its cause. So the exact strategy as to how we get such an institute funded or started, it's a work in progress right now. I and my collaborator, Chris Stokes at Roland, we are more tied down with the technical details of the science, review of the knowledge, synthesis of ideas, making of the presentations, and the building of prototype reactors leveraging solar thermal energy. And so it's a work in progress. And the goal for this year is basically to disseminate the knowledge through meetings more informal like this, and also formal presentations at leading university and research institutes around the world and the conferences. So I have about 3 or 4 coming up scheduled before the second half of the year, including at research institutes that specialize on leveraging solar thermal energy, and also publishing, the findings we have and the whole conceptual shift that we're trying to communicate through publications, including both established journals and popular media, such as major newspapers. So that's the current strategy and our current progress. It's and there's a comment about leveraging, say, the mirror arrays and combining with
sea permaculture.
Sea permaculture, like algae blooms, right, in order to also hasten the drawdown of carbon. So specifically to algae blooms, I want to point out that it's a temporary sink of carbon. You have the algae growing quickly when there's abundant nutrient and sunlight. They suck down carbon. Doing so, they make the pH go higher and making everybody happy around them, but except for they also block out sunlight for other organisms. But they die quickly too, and in doing so, their remains gets metabolized by heterotrophs that re-release this carbon back. So
oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, algae bloom is not a good idea. So
okay.
I would also want to take this opportunity to address a question I got from Dot about using the floating infrastructure of mirrors as an anchor point for growing seaweed, which I illustrated instead of growing oysters. Yeah, seaweed it's something we could consider growing, but not for use as to sequester carbon, because plants, no matter where they are, they're intrinsically energetically inefficient at fixing carbon compared to technological methods we have. But we should leverage them to grow higher value products such as seafoods, and also to help move agriculture off of land. So that's why that's how we should use this aquaculture to grow higher value products like oysters, to feed them to lobsters or other fish, and seaweeds maybe to cattle. Apparently it's possible to reduce methane emissions from cattle by feeding them seaweed. So we should target growing higher value products and reserve carbon capture to more efficient inorganic and technological means. But frankly, after temperature variable is controlled by the mirrors, CO2 is no longer relevant. In fact, existing studies at ecosystem level point to that a higher CO2 level will help ecosystem recover faster, because they, first of all, promote the growth of primary producers. So the plants, the algae, the seaweed, they all grow faster. And when there's no thermal stress, the predators will be happy. So sometimes they get a heat stroke, so they stop eating, and that causes habit. But when the temperature is nice and it's cool and there's plenty of primary producers, then the prey species would also, become quite abundant, and up the chain, and predators will also be abundant, and humans were, uber predators, so we will also be happy on top of that ecosystem. So the primary thing, again, it's really important to separate temperature and the CO2, and really focus our attention on CO2 using the simplest method, the most durable method, and the cheapest method. And then after that, CO2 is a problem of secondary importance that will only become relevant if somehow we didn't manage to stop burning all of the fossil fuel reserve we have. Otherwise, we can just leave it alone and let nature slowly, over millennia, centuries, millennia, slowly bring it back down naturally without much human involvement.
And just a follow-up, let's say that funding was taken out of the equation. You have what you need to those levels. What's your time projection of could we deploy this at a very global scale within 3 years? I know Guy needs it yesterday, but I would like a comment from Guy on this. But what is your, if this was totally vetted and verified, and you have what you need for resources? I mean, just the manufacturing and the deployment. You have people having jobs now, deploying these all over the oceans. I mean, can we do it in a scale that would just allow us to make it through the keyhole? Or
I will first let Guy comment on the time scale, whether we have enough time to.
Yeah.
Just in 3 years. Then I will maybe chip in after.
Well, obviously, we don't know how much time we have, but I'm certain that time is short. And in light of that, I think we need to get some input from the marine ecology arena. There's a lot about the biology and the ecology of these systems that we don't know. And I'm the closest thing we have to a marine biologist in this group, and I don't know anything. So we need to have more input from that side of things. I think perhaps the most important thing, given that time is short, is getting the attention of people like Jeff Bezos and Warren Bates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because that's where the money's going to come from. The government, we all know the government moves way too slowly to implement what needs to be done here. And if the Gates Foundation is willing to support David Keith's insane idea of spraying particles over the southwestern United States, which according to the evidence would have to be done literally forever to be effective, and forever is really quite a long time, especially toward the end. If the Gates Foundation is willing to support something like that, then surely this idea, which is much more practical, much more pragmatic, much more doable, and also clearly separates the impact of heating from carbon dioxide, which is important, then I can't imagine that the sociopaths currently pulling the strings of empire wouldn't be on board with a well-presented analysis of where we're at. How do we make that happen? I think this is the most important thing we can do. We can have these conversations involving 25 or 30 people, but until they involve 5 or 10 people who actually are in positions of influence, then I don't think our time is being well spent here.
Well, let me just comment briefly on that, Guy. This is just the beginning, right? We're going to go from dozens to hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands very quickly. And all of us have lots of friends. And as word spreads through our social networks, and it won't take too long for the media to pick up that something is brewing here, I think we can make traction exponentially. So abrupt climate change, please meet abrupt collective superintelligence. So I think a lot more is possible than what we might imagine at the present moment with this medium that we're pioneering here. All righty.
I would imagine, just as a final note, I would imagine focusing on the Arctic, as Guy, you would say, if we're losing the ice, we're just way past the tipping point at that point, but maybe would this work on just splattering the Arctic ice cap just with mirrors? Would that slow the melting, or is it just a temperature issue? They'll just melt under it.
I think I can take that question. But I would first like to go back to addressing the timescale of the implementation question. I think 3 years, given sufficient funding, it's definitely possible, maybe even faster. So right
Fantastic.
now, there are a couple pieces of missing puzzles that need to be elucidated. One is just test the rate of dissolution, say, of these mirrors in ocean conditions. And that's a project that can be done over a summer, this coming summer, with an undergrad project. So we have a reactor already built to test the rate of dissolution of glass, and that will allow assessing the chemical impact, say, of glass in ocean. And another piece that's needs to be demonstrated is how to make very nicely hermetically sealed floating glass structures with a mirror reflector on the inside. And because of the scale at which this is happening, we cannot just use good old glass blowing technique to make these one by one. So we need some sort of industrialized process, possibly involving making the mirror reflector and the floating cavity independently. And then you would have the question of how do you fuse the reflector with the floating cavity together. There's a sealing problem. So there's some ideas we're exploring right now, but there's a couple of demonstrations that it's possible, for example, to use fast laser pulses to blast around the rim and making a good seal. But there's only demonstrations in other different systems, not particularly for this. But given sufficient financial support and government or maybe more private investment, these are solutions that can be tackled on the year timescale. And then the rest would be industrial implementation. But if we somehow were able to make the proposal and problem more widely known, there could be parallel efforts in preparing large-scale production while the details of the fabrication gets ironed out. So there was a second question. What's the second part? So that was the implementation time frame.
Oh, well, I was also wondering about placing these mirrors.
Okay.
Maybe priority would be in the Arctic or anything covering ice, or would that matter?
Okay. Yes.
At that point.
So very recently, like my colleague alerted me to a conference that took place. I think was January 15th, which I missed. And there's a group called ICE 911. I think Jamen also mentioned that in one of his emails. So it's a group based in, I think, Stanford, working on addressing the Arctic freezing problem by apparently putting reflective nanoparticles of silica, so also glass, in a small form on an annual basis to keep or help ice melt slower. Then, of course, certainly mirrors implemented in the Arctic would do the same thing effectively. But I think the problem in the Arctic on the timescale of the threats we face is a threat that we can put aside a little bit for the moment, because even if the whole Arctic were to melt, the effective heating is about 0.6 watts per square meter. That's roughly 20–30% of current CO2 warming. So we get a bump in total planetary warming, but it's only a fraction of what we have. And if we can use the mirror to implement it elsewhere in a more manageable location than the Arctic, then to address 3 watts per square meter problem, then we can certainly add a bit more to address the loss of Arctic. And eventually, hopefully with enough cooling, then it might be possible to stop the melting trend and to stabilize the ice. But in the Arctic, mirrors of the floating type that we are thinking of may not be the best option because a freezing of the ice may stress the mirrors and the glass may shatter them, whereas in waters that are permanently in liquid form, they would be more durable. So perhaps I think efforts at Stanford would be the strategy that's more optimal for addressing Arctic problem.
Makes perfect sense. I yield the floor back. Thank you, Jamen, for the opportunity.
Oh, dude, absolutely. Thank you, Dylan. Dylan, you and all of us are what make collective intelligence possible and make collective intelligence happen. So this is very much an all of us kind of thing. You know, in terms of you know, of what needs to happen next, I've been looking at some of the comments in the chat, not all of them, but there's this trend bubbling up here of unity, of getting all of these scientists in different groups together. One of the things that I've been calling for is for the different groups that are working on different facets of solar radiation management, that we come together and form a united front. So let's unite with ice911.org. I've reached out to them and suggested that, haven't heard back yet, but I'm sure it won't take too long, especially as this medium of collective intelligence grows. We're all going to be talking with each other. And in Mexico, we have a very simple saying. It goes like this: hablando se entiende la gente. Talking is how people understand each other. And that's what this medium is giving humanity. It's bringing humanity back into conversation. We're only going to get so far with text that can be misinterpreted and that does not have the richness of gestures and tonality and body language and all this good stuff that we're experiencing right here. This is how we evolved to communicate around the campfire tens of thousands of years ago. So we're bringing back actual conversations to humanity. This is a key missing ingredient. So I really want to put in a plug for the United Front. Bring your friends next time. We do this every Friday now. This is the first of a weekly standing 24-hour collective intelligence block party. So this is just the beginning. Alrighty, we've got some folks patiently waiting. Melissa, you ready, sweetheart?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Ye and Guy, for your incredible contributions and conversations. Thank you, Jamen, for making this happen. I just wanted to go back to something Paul Dworkin keeps bringing up, and I think Nathan raised this as well, is about how many people are very afraid of facing climate change, and they don't want to look at what's actually going on and what can we do about that, and how can we get the voice of scientists heard in a way that people are not shirking from out of fear. And so I'm a visual artist, and I'm using my work to actually engage people in conversation around climate change. And my experience working with the 350s.org in Seattle and other organizations is that the majority of people that I've come in contact with through public art installations want to do something. They want to be part of being the solution. And I also think most people do not know about your work and the idea of mirror reflection for solar radiation management. Another aspect is, how do we connect people with what they love again, or help them get reconnected to nature, because we will protect what we love, what we care about. And I think that what I'd like to make as a suggestion and a proposal is that artists and scientists can team up and use art as a vehicle to tell the story in a way that's engaging, that brings people into action without fear, or mitigating the fear, and also allows people to do this grieving work that we also are in the process of feeling and needing to do around loss, because there's a lot of it happening right now. Just look at Australia, of course. I just wanted to read Octavia Butler, who's an African-American author. This is a quote from her: "Art makes the revolution irresistible." And I would like to propose that to you, that we have radical imagination along with radical collective intelligence and radical simple ideas such as yours, Ye. So yes, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Can I quickly respond? Thank you, Melissa, for bringing up the power of art. I'm in complete agreement. I think art and the science are very much connected. So I myself am a musician, and playing the piano is how I find solace in the worse today is when I first realized the problem that we're facing. And it turns out that I met a member of your expertise, Rachel Simpson, based on the West Coast at a conference. And she's currently helping out a little bit with starting to have ideas for illustrations. And I think we can never have enough manpower in this. So it'd be great if people with different expertise would get connected and we can somehow better organize this in the spirit of this collective intelligence. So Melissa, it would be great if you could send me an email, and I can probably hopefully put the artists also together in a group, and we can coordinate collective effort to make it more impactful and better illustrations and better ideas for all the different fronts. So along the same logic, people with other expertise that you think could be helpful, please also contact each other, and let's just form different niche of expertise and work on the different fronts in parallel.
Thank you, Ye, definitely. And I'd be happy to collaborate with you and any other scientists to do some major public art installations that are community engagement. And then Jamen and I will be going out to Pacifica, California. We want to call for artists to work with it there in California, and they're on the front line of climate change due to soil erosion and storm surges and sea level rise. So we'll be working with their community, creating community engagement art installations and workshops. So yeah, let's do it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Melissa. And just love everything you both have been saying in the last few minutes. And I just want to emphasize that what we're doing right here with the Collective Intelligence Block Party today, for this first inaugural block party, we're all together in one room, right? As our numbers grow, that's going to be much less tenable. And also, some of us are going to want to, go off into a breakout room and talk about art. Others are going to want to go into a breakout room and talk about politics. Others, media and culture, right? Others about the news story for humanity. Others about the science. Others about the engineering. Others about the computer modeling. This is collective superintelligence, where we turn this whole thing into a network of conversations, a social network of actual conversations. And other media. Conversations is just the beginning. There's lots of media. Brain Swarming, developed by Dr. Tony McCaffrey, published on the Harvard Business Review. You can look at that online. Brain Swarming, one word. That's a key methodology. GitHub has done really great stuff with open source, which we can take to creating open source solutions. So there's all kinds of things we can do, but it all starts with conversation. That's why we're starting with the Collective Intelligence Block Party. So I just wanted to put in a plug for the potential that all this has to grow exponentially in coming up with all these diverse solutions: science, engineering, art, politics, finance, et cetera, et cetera. All righty. Wonderful conversation. Miles, you had your hand up a few minutes ago.
No, I was just tapping my screen.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good.
Great discussion. I'd like to say hi to Nancy. She's with me from the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group, and I've invited people from that organization to drop by. I also invited the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who is former Minister of Defense in Canada. Maybe he'll drop by at some point. Skip Conover, as I mentioned, is a self-taught scholar on the psychology of Carl Jung. And I did invite Pam Palmater, who is an Indigenous lawyer here in Canada. So yeah, this can grow exponentially just by saying, hey, it's just a block party, come on in, share, check out Radish, look them up, but you can just come as a friend and party, insofar as this is a party of the minds, and we'll have some fun at the same time as we solve problems.
Beautiful. Thank you, Miles. Nancy, you have your hand up, and welcome, Nancy. Great to see you.
I'm so excited about what you're doing. This is just fabulous. I wanted to bring in the point that religion has a place to play in this in terms of changing the attitude and view of being self-centered and to being other-centered. And I would like to say more on that perhaps next week. But it doesn't necessarily mean a religion in the sense of Christianity or Buddhism, because the Carl Jung psychology also offers a path where there is that deep center within us calling us to wholeness. And by going towards that, cooperating with that, the ego center of consciousness begins to be humbled and to be more open to wholeness, caring for others, for the planet, and so forth.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know for me personally, I have a limited knowledge of Carl Jung, but I really admire what work of his I'm aware of. And I feel like we have to start doing the collective kind of psychological shadow work that we have been doing on individual levels in therapeutic sessions. We now have to kind of take that on as our practice as a collective, as a larger group, to really solve problems.
Something that's very interesting to me is this Korean pop band called BTS. And they have about 80 million fans around the world, all kinds of groups called the BTS armies that are supporting them. And they're getting the message of Carl Jung's psychology out. They have a new album coming out, I think, on the 17th of this month called The Shadow. And so it'll be interesting to see. But in other words, this is happening worldwide now, this influence, and it's something hopefully that can be tapped into.
Who's got their hand raised?
Well, it looks like Patricia has her hand raised. Patricia, would you like to speak?
Yeah. Just a second. Yeah, so great to be here. Yeah, so I guess now, did our speakers, I can't figure out, let's see, who's here? Are we asking questions of Ye or what are we doing now? Oh, Ye's still here. Now I see everybody. I love that name. Yay! What is it? Ho, ho, ha. Well, we'll have to say yay in our ho, 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 ha, 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 he, he. Yay! So that's my contribution, just my introduction. And I am going to get certified in laughter yoga. So I'm hoping that and our wonderful other guest who, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, that you guys will join in laughter therapy. Laughter yoga, because I think we all need that because this topic is so serious. And maybe every 15 minutes we could have a break, a laughter break. I'm kind of joking about that. But my question also is, how do you see creating healthy community, healthy connections among each other, so that, because sometimes it kind of there's an attitude like, whoa, we don't have time to connect because we only have so many years. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to address that, the importance of creating healthy connections, healthy community, and how we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And thank you so much for bringing lightness and laughter. Everybody, Patricia and I recently got to know each other, and we discovered we were separated at birth. So that explains a lot, I think. And speaking of creating healthy connections and healthy community, look at what we're doing right now. Nobody had to travel. All you had to do was click on a link, right? So much more is powerful today than has ever been powerful before, than has ever been possible before. So please keep coming. Bring the best people you know. For starters, ultimately, we're going to get everyone here, the whole of humanity connected. But for starters, bring the best people you know. Tell them, come, check this out, or at least watch the live stream, experience it, right? And then come jump in when you're comfortable, right? And we will have laughter breaks, Patricia. And I think over time, we're going to have a lot to celebrate. There's been a lot of bad news, and the point was made earlier that we really need to bundle these two together, the problem and the solution. You know, when I first met Guy McPherson, all we really had was the problem, and the only solution was planetary hospice. Get ready to die. To say it in an oversimplified way. So anyway, so grateful for everyone. Hey, Fred just joined. Great to see you, Fred. We're having quite a time here. Is anyone else waiting to talk, or would anyone else like to talk? I don't think anyone's in the queue at the moment. We've got some comments. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you guys happy Valentine's Day. I turned 52 minutes ago, so gonna go do lunch at Ruby Tuesdays with my wife. And, thank you guys so much, and yay, Dr. Tao, you're awesome. Thanks for all your hard work, and I know you're probably very busy with your other commitments, and let's get this thing going. I'll look forward to more developments. I did sign up late last night on radish.org, Jamen, so thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day, and happy Valentine's Day.
Well, can't we sing happy birthday to you?
Let's do it. 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Nathan. Happy birthday to you.
You guys rock. Keep smiling. Much love. Later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Nathan.
We'll see you soon, Nathan. Keep coming back. Thanks, brother. This is collective intelligence. See, this is humanity. Look, remember back in the late 60s when the astronauts first took that picture of the Earth, and like we suddenly could see the Earth as a whole, right? You know how that changed our psyche? It really changed humanity, that we could, and it changed Mother Earth looking at herself for the first time. This is something I would call similarly momentous. Humanity getting to talk with each other for the first time outside of any institution, outside of the normal ways that we get segregated and put together by class, by race, by neighborhood, right? By, institution. Oh, I just talk with my colleagues. I don't really talk with people outside of work, yada, yada, whatever, right? This is humanity just coming together in a totally neutral platform with the most benevolent aim of saving life on Earth for all species. This is totally new. This has never happened before. And this is going to keep happening. We're going to keep doing this every single Friday. I don't care what month of the year. I don't care what holiday. If it's Friday, we're here, all right, for 24 hours on the Collective Intelligence Block Party.
I just want to say, Jamen, I just really appreciate your leadership, your enthusiasm, your validation of everyone. I mean, I saw the picture of you, the history of that you worked for Bill Gates, and that picture of you look so different in a suit, and you know, just feeling so grateful that you can take that intellect and ability. That I think that's why we were separated at birth, because the dark forces knew that if we were together from birth, we would have already solved all the problems.
Exactly. Yeah, we're like Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia or something like that.
And this is the myth that we're creating, that you're all a part of, that we're all meant to come together at this time, at this place. We decided before we were born, we were going to meet at this very moment, at this block party. So thank you all for heeding the call.
Beautiful. Thank you, Patricia. You all notice how time flies when you're having fun? We've been in this conversation with Dr. Ye Tao, Professor Guy McPherson about SRM for almost 3 hours now. And
need to actually leave now for other commitments, but it's a pleasure to talk to everybody. And I hope you guys have fun for the rest of the day.
Yay. Thank you so much. I think I speak for everyone in saying we are blown away, extremely grateful, and we want to keep making this happen with you. So
Yes,
please keep coming back to the block party every Friday. We'll be here, and we'll be getting better and better organized with better and better tools and software and all that. So this is kind of the Wild West, the very first block party. Yay, thank you so much. And we will have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.